Hi, my name is Cecilia Poullain, and welcome to this episode of Brave New Women. All around the world, there are amazing, ordinary women doing extraordinary things. Brave New Women is about giving those women a platform and a voice, and it's about changing the way that women are perceived, and it's a way of inspiring all of us to do the things that we've always wanted to do. Today I'm sitting down to talk to Deborah Carter. So hi, Deborah.
Hello. Hi, Cecilia.
And Deborah is Canadian, but she's lived in the Netherlands for many, many years. And I'm talking to Deborah because in 2014, she created a company called NewTechKids. And the reason she created it was because she has a son and she was worried about making sure that her son had proper education in technology before he went out into the wider world. And because she was aware of how much technology was influencing all the professions, in almost every profession now, technology is such a big part of it. So that was what she did in 2004. And then in 2020, in the summer of 2020, she created PreparationTech. And there the idea was to showcase people from different professions, students, or from, a whole lot of different backgrounds about what their interaction was with technology. And again, it was so that they could tell their stories to kids and that kids could then be inspired and learn more and think about how they could be using technology later in their lives. So welcome, Deborah.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Deborah, I'd like to ask you first, if you could just tell me a bit about your background, where you grew up, how you came into be in the Netherlands, a bit about your family.
Absolutely. So my parents are from the English Caribbean, from a small island called Barbados. And they immigrated first to England, where I was born, and then to Canada, where I grew up. And grew up in close to Toronto in Canada, and went to university in Canada, in the capital, Ottawa. And then I was able to go and study in the US to do a work fellowship. And from there, I was recruited by a few American companies, spent 3 years in America before moving to the Netherlands in the year 2000. And I have been here on and off. I come from a media background, so I trained as a journalist, did 2 degrees actually in journalism, worked as a journalist. And then when the internet was becoming big, I switched over, worked at companies like AOL, America Online, and also the New York Times. And then when I moved to the Netherlands in 2000, I actually moved into the business side of things, into internet research and strategy and these kinds of things. So as you mentioned, in 2014, after working for a lot of big companies, I decided to go out on my own and to create NewTechKids, to create this tech education academy specifically for primary school students, because there's more technology education for high school students, but really to engage and inspire little kids, there was little. So that's what we did as a team. And so we've been doing that for 6 years. And it's been great. We have really changed our kind of teaching pedagogy and our teaching approach. And so this is it. And then in the summer, as you mentioned, we started PreparationTech, which brings me back to my love of journalism, of interviewing, etc. So it's kind of a full circle.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot in what you just said. So let's just go back a little bit. I'd be interested to know how did it feel when going out on your own and creating your own business after you'd been working in, for other people for many, many years.
Yeah.
How was that?
Well, it was scary, but I have to say it was more exciting than scary. I always found myself a bit constrained by corporate culture, and to actually create something from scratch and to see it grow has been really amazing. I'm very lucky that I have a really large network of experts, business people, education people, technology people around me. So it wasn't like I was doing this alone. There was a whole community around me, as well as people who just believed in this mission. So it's been, I think, the most professionally fulfilling thing ever of all the stuff I've done in my career. Cannot lie to you, it is not easy. It can be hair-raising. I mean, for now, all of our programs right now are shut down because of the national lockdown. So you have that kind of stress. But, when I get tired or when I get defeated, I go into the classroom. So I do not teach our courses, but I work with a team of teachers. I help develop curriculum and this kind of thing. And for me, what really energizes me is going into the classroom, sitting with the kids, being the assistant teacher, and just seeing the learning process. And that just energizes me. So.
Mm. Well, tell me about that. Tell me about what actually happens. What is NewTechKids? What happens in the classroom?
So NewTechKids is a technology education academy based in Amsterdam, and we teach different kinds of programs. We teach programs during school, so as part of the school curriculum, after school, and on weekends, in school holidays. And we even get invited overseas. So every year we go to the Middle East to teach there. We work with companies like Education First, EF Tours, where if they send a group of students to Amsterdam for a cultural tour, they will embed our technology workshops, this kind of thing. So we have really specialized in engaging little kids, so kids ages 4 to 12, around technology, not just using it, but actually starting to think of how it works, why it works, and how to create things themselves. So to shift them from just being these passive technology users to being technology creators. Now, there's a lot in there. So we started off by just teaching programming. Kids would come in, we say, okay, today we're going to program a robot to do blah, blah, blah.
When you say program a robot,
yes.
So what would that actually be when you say programming a robot?
So what we do is we use a Lego robotics kits. So they have the Lego pieces, but then motors and all kinds of wires that you can put together. And basically you can build a robotic device, either a robot that moves or a robot that lifts, but it's a combination of the blocks themselves and the motors, and then a visual programming language. So it's an interface on your computer where you drag and drop, and that tells the robot what to do. So the motor should lift up. And it's a visual programming, so it's really intuitive for kids. Like the programming that adults use tends to be really complicated, like with the numbers and the letters. And if you're not good at that, or if you make one little mistake, nothing works. So Lego has developed this visual programming, which is really intuitive. You drag and drop, and it works, like it's logical, right? So it teaches kids the logic of programming, and it's very easy to troubleshoot. So that's what we do. So we started off by just focusing on build and program. And then we thought, you know what? We are only attracting the usual suspects, which are little boys. Hardly any girls, hardly any kids of color. So we said, let's start to adapt the way we teach. So we started introducing class discussions about technology, showing kids examples, talking about the implications and the consequences and the ethics. Bing, all of a sudden girls are more interested because you've got this whole thinking around this.
When you say class discussions, do you mean you were going into classrooms, actual classrooms where that were existing, or these were kids that were coming to you?
A bit of both. So if we take one of our typical lessons, our lessons always start with a class discussion. And that gets the kids warmed up in terms of technology, thinking critically about technology and having opinions, and also being the inspiration to then build a prototype. So, for example, we're doing a course where we want to teach something like loops. How do loops work in programming? So instead of just saying, okay, program a loop, we'll say, okay, today we're looking at farming, because farming has a lot of technology. Robots, drones, all these things are now in technology, which makes technology more efficient. So we give a class discussion. We show a robot picking fruit. Mm-hmm. So we talk about, what are the implications of this? What is the robot doing that a human is not doing? And how are humans and robots working together? What's the good side of this? What's the bad side of this, right? Why was this invented? So, for example, Trump changed the labor laws. And so all of a sudden, there was a lack of farm workers from Latin America coming up. So then this is where technology comes in, because it takes the place of humans. So we'll talk about this. And typically the girls love this part of class, right? They're engaged. And we do this because the next thing is we give them a challenge. Okay, today, kids, we talked about farming. You guys are running a farm, and we need to get this, this, and this done. So create a robot. That's your challenge. So they get into groups of 2 or 3, and they build this robot. And they have to actually design it, to brainstorm about it, then to build it, then to program it. And then always at the end of our class, we then have the kids present their prototype and explain the learning process. What did you try to do? What worked? What didn't? What was hard? What would you do the next time? Mm-hmm. So by hacking the format of our class, it becomes more interesting to kids that are the hardcore programming type because there's more around it. And that is something that we learned only by being in the class and getting feedback from kids, feedback from parents, etc. But now, when we started, it was about 85% boys, 90% boys, and we're almost at parity now between boys and girls. And that's just because we teach in a very different way. There's other things we do, but that's a concrete example for you.
I wonder why it is that the girls find it more attractive when you have the class discussion at the beginning.
I think because girls, I don't want to make huge assumptions, but in my opinion and from my observations, girls like the critical thinking component. They're not just crazy about how things work. They want to know more like why and the broader context for things. And we find that the class discussion, the girls tend to be very confident when they discuss their ideas and stuff. And we tap into that confidence because they're going to need it when we shift to the part of the lesson that they're not so comfortable with, which is the building. Most girls do not grow up with Lego, with building. That's kind of associated with boys. So they come to our classes with a disadvantage. We've also hacked that process by embedding in a lot of design classes before we get to the challenges, because a lot of kids from lower income areas, girls, kids of color, did not grow up with Lego. So they don't understand the physics of building. So we have to teach them that quickly. But we do, and I can say, when we give them a bit of extra help, by the end of the class, the girls are actually outperforming the boys in terms of the quality of the prototypes.
That's interesting, isn't it? And you find that the ideas that they come up with at the end of the class are very different?
Yes. So we start our classes like a program. They're all designing pretty much the same robot, but that's just to get them familiar with that. But the longer we go forward, the less structure we have with the challenges. So the more general the challenges become, so their interpretation and their ideas kind of come to the fore. So interpret this any which way you want. And then you see kids with different kinds of robots. And of course, they have different abilities. So some kids will do like these Uber robots. Others will just do a really solid robot that does one thing. That's okay. Our goal, we had, when we started, a lot of ambition to teach all these concepts and have these kids to be like amazing technologists. And we backed a bit away from that. We say that we just want kids to understand the basics, to be inspired, to be engaged, so that their experience of technology education is a good one, is a positive one. That's our real priority. Because often what happens is if you teach technology in too technical a way, you scare girls and kids of color away. They think, oh, this is not for me. I look around and I see the kids that are doing this and they don't look like me. So we want to make that first experience really positive and inspiring so that they'll say, okay, when this is over, maybe I do want to do a Python course, or maybe I do want to do another Scratch course.
And when you're talking about how are you going with kids of color? You said that there are a lot more girls that are being engaged. What about kids of color?
That's really interesting. Less kids of color, but they're still there. What I find the dynamic is we're seeing a lot of kids of Moroccan and Turkish descent coming into our programs. And the thing I think that is the cause of this phenomena is that their parents work in tech and they understand that it's important for these kids to get it. We've had other kids of color that come in, but that particular group, that Moroccans and Turks, tend to be higher than, say, other kids of color. I think that's it. So we have been hired to teach quite a few times in the south of Amsterdam, which is a predominantly low-income immigrant community. we are then commissioned by an organization to come and teach long programs there. And we've done that too. And what has been really nice with this is that the kids, again, they don't have the exposure to technology education building, but they come up. But what they do have, their critical thinking is sharp. These guys all speak English for the most part. So usually we have to teach only in Dutch, but because it's such a high immigrant level there, we can teach in English, switch over, which is amazing. And we find that the way we adapt it is we talk more about automation and about how automation is really making some jobs obsolete, because unfortunately, the people in these kids' lives, their jobs are at higher risk for automation. So we adapt the message a bit to explain why they need to have these tech skills and knowledge, basically. But for the most part, some of these kids, especially the ones that don't come from this background, from lower income, performing at a less high academic level, we just take a bit longer to do things. But by the end of it, they're really at the same level as the kids in our normal programs.
That's great. And when you say tech, what do you actually mean?
I'm talking about digital tech. So technology is a pencil, right? I mean, it's just something that is created to perform a task, right? But we're talking about internet technology, digital technology, robotics, this kind of stuff.
And so it's really about how children, getting them engaged with technology, engaged with computers, knowing how it's work, and getting them to think, okay, well, if I had a problem, how would I approach the problem? So it's more the problem solving rather than saying these are the answers.
Absolutely. Technology is a problem solving tool. So how can we shape kids' mindsets to see it as such? Because all of a sudden then you don't have girls and kids of color saying it's not for me. It becomes for everyone because it's a means to an end. And you can use technology to solve any kind of problem, including problems that are relevant to you and important to you. So absolutely, it's a problem solving tool. That's how we see it.
And have you seen any kids who have, for example, come into the classroom and been a bit, what's all this about? And then...
Oh, yes, we have. Oh, we've had kids that come in and tell us, well, we're only here because our parents are making us come here and we're not interested in tech and it's not for me. We have had kids who come in and say, oh, we're only here because we want to be hackers. And the parents, meanwhile, have told me, I'm putting my kid in this program because they want to be hackers and we're really scared. So yeah, we do have some resistance. I'll refer to some of our programs in schools. So we've had situations where kids, a whole class of students has been obligated to participate in our program for like 10, 12 weeks. And we come in and we already see the attitude. The girls are all sitting together and they're like, and we get a lot of that. And I tend to come to those classes because that's when they need to see a female role model, because our teachers are mostly male. And we also have to bust this kind of cartel. So what happens is typically the first class, we let them pair up with each other. And then the second class is like, nope. And so we disperse them. We put them with boys or we put them with kids that they don't know. So that whole cliquey, we don't want to be here kind of diminishes. And then I go really heavy on the praise. Really heavy on, even if they do the most simple things, I'm like, wow, it worked and worked. And soon they're like, oh my gosh, we can do this. We can do this. And then you see by the end of it, they're hugging me and saying, we're going to miss you.
Oh,
so there you go. Yeah, it's really lovely. It's really lovely.
Yeah, I can imagine that would just fill you up.
Yeah. There was this one funny story too. So there's a little boy in our class. He's about, what is he? He must be 11. This guy is a class clown. When we started the program, we were like, why is he here? Because he's clearly not interested in anything to do with technology. And he spends his time disrupting and entertaining kids and distracting them from this. So we kind of dealt with him by letting him be the class clown and kind of keeping him busy, So the next round of programs, the kids can now choose which program they're going to be in. I walk into the classroom and who do I see but this little boy thinking this would be the last thing he wants to do. This time around, he is so focused. I thought he couldn't master these concepts because he's got obviously some learning problems. But here he is being the leader and showing other kids. I thought to myself, Deborah, never underestimate kids because they will surprise you.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's quite fun. He's still funny. He's still the class clown, but he's doing the work. So that's okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And tell me about PreparationTech. Where did the idea for that come from?
PreparationTech. Well, over the years, it's been 6 years of running NewTechKids and a lot of conversations with kids. So what we've started to do with our lessons is also to educate kids about the careers, the things that you can do with tech skills and education. So typically now, if we do a lesson on farming, then we will talk about, say, a software engineer and how they are working in the farming industry, just to get it into kids' minds that there are all these careers that you could have when you have technology education. So PreparationTech is really flows from that. So I've had so many conversations with parents saying, I know my kid is interested in this and I wanted to give him the tech skills to put it together, but I have no idea what careers or what study paths are out there. Or teachers who say, oh my gosh, I went to school like 20 years ago. I have no idea what the careers of today are. Kids themselves, like, I'm really interested in biology, but how do I put that with technology, right? So all of these things, and then obviously earlier in the year, the pandemic struck in March. So we had to shut all of our programs. And so we made a tactical decision to actually act on this gap in knowledge. And that's how PreparationTech was born. So for months, I was just interviewing people. I would just contact people and say, hey, can you tell your story? How did you get into tech? And what were the factors in your childhood? And people were like, oh, and there's some famous people that I interviewed that I have friends that work in the event industry and they can't even get them to come to talk, but they talk to me because I think there's just this inherent desire to help the next generation and to also share the story so that kids can learn from it and maybe not make the same mistakes or at least be prepared when the time comes. And for me, it's a circle back to my journalism, which I love. I just love to interview people and to talk about people's stories. So that's how PreparationTech was born. I've talked to all kinds of people. I've talked to people from like the world's leading roboticist to an IP lawyer, to an industrial designer, to a self-taught 3D designer. This guy is so inspiring. He dropped out of college 3 times. Why? Because from the age of 9, he was crazy about designing in 3D. He started with Google SketchUp, which is a free kind of graphic design program, and he started to just sketch cars. And then from that, he went into 3D design. Meanwhile, his father and grandfather are mechanics. So they're feeding him information about how cars work. And he's translating that into his 3D. And he keeps going, he keeps going, he keeps going. He goes to college 3 times, and he's like, college isn't working for me because I've created my own creative process and they're teaching a creative process, which is really at odds with how I work. And he is still in demand as a 3D designer, industrial designer, animator, game developer. But so we want to tell these kinds of stories too, because it's not just this linear path of high school, university, and then career. It's also technology enables people who do not have formal schooling to still be successful because they have the ability to teach themselves things, because they have a curiosity and they have this desire to solve problems. Autodidactic learning. So yeah, PreparationTech is all about that. We try to interview a range of students, professionals, and self-taught people. I've also recently interviewed one of the top hackers in the US, Pablo Holman, who talks about his story, because I know Pablo's because he's kind of famous, right? He's done a lot of cool things. He's worked with Jeff Bezos on rockets. He's worked with Bill Gates on, overcoming malaria, like eradicating malaria. But I didn't know his story. And the thing is, I always think how these hackers are so focused. I mean, They're just so uber focused. They know so much. So he tells the story. He was a kid in Alaska with nothing around him. And the father, who knew nothing about computers, gave him a computer. He said, well, what do you do in Alaska when there's nothing else? He says, it's really hard for people to catch up, because I had literally nothing to do for years except for dive into how these computers work. But he was just so hilarious. He said also, most parents are complaining about their kids playing video games. I'm trying to convince my kid to quit school to play video games. I think his daughter's like 9 or something like this. I don't know. It's really hilarious. But there's technology. It's a window, right? It's a window because it's kind of democratizing the world in terms of education and training and skills. So you may not come from an Ivy League school, but you can sure do in this day and age more than a classic graduate, And I think we need to be teaching kids that you may not like technology, you may not be a computer scientist or a programmer, but you are going to need tech skills, and you're just going to have a basic knowledge of tech. It's just what it is. You are on a spectrum, and you can determine where you want to be, if you want to be a tech expert or just a tech user or someone who's creative and uses tech creatively, but you're going to be on this. And so be very conscious in the decisions you make, because they will impact where you are on that spectrum.
Deborah, where did your interest in tech come from?
It's very personal. I am definitely not a tech focused person. I use it, but I'm not creating it, or I don't have a computer science degree, but I do have a son. And when my son was 7, I noticed that in the curriculum, there was nothing about technology. We live in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and there was nothing related to technology. And I was really concerned, because tech is pervasive. It's everywhere. And to the point that I think this goes for a lot of kids, they don't even see how much tech is around us, right? So when we go to the train station and we click the card, that's tech. When the CCTV cameras around us, the automat, the banking machine to take money out of, it's everywhere. The TV, all of these things, your heating system in your house, etc. And I was really worried. And I thought, we need to change the paradigm. We need to get this education to younger kids. So he became guinea pig number 1 for NewTechKids. And, I would have hoped that he would be more into technology, but he's not. He can program and stuff, but he does not have aspirations to be a programmer or a computer scientist. That's fine. But he's aware of it. He knows how it works. He can create and prototype with it. That's enough. He has choices on that spectrum. And that's his choice. Exactly. That's his choice. And now, lots of kids get this benefit. And it wasn't just him, it was also his friends and kids of color and girls who need this. They need to be active in technology if they want their perspectives and experiences reflected, and if they want to basically benefit members of the community. Someone said, you can't play the game if you're not in the game, right? So you can be on the sidelines and critiquing technology, but if you don't have the tools to do anything about it, it's difficult.
How prepared are kids now for university in terms of tech?
I'm hearing different stories. I think it really depends on the kid. I mean, if you're typically a boy that has been going to programming classes since you're 5 or 6, and you're prepared, right? For the technical side of things. I think I've interviewed quite a few first year and second year university students. And typically what they say is, I had no idea there was so much tech, in whatever profession they're going into. And also I wasn't prepared. I spent a lot of time catching up, which was very stressful. And I think a lot of smart universities understand that. So they spend the first year kind of balancing and equalizing and getting people all up to the same kind of level, or at least the basic level. But I'm hearing too much about kids who enter university without the proper technology education.
I mean, when we talk about tech, one of the things that we hear most about is the fact that kids are too much in front of screens. So I'd like to hear your views on that.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Everybody's talking about social dilemma. So we know kind of that these devices and these services have been designed to grab attention. And my worry is that we are not teaching kids attention literacy, being aware of how they use tech, why they use tech, being aware of those little triggers that have been specifically developed to keep them addicted to this stuff. So I think I'm hoping to see much that integrated actually into the school curriculum so that kids are at least aware. It may not change their behavior, but I really, as a parent, as an educator, think that we cannot just leave kids to figure this out. We must intervene. So my son is now doing online schooling for high school. And I take his phone away. I'm constantly taking his phone away because I see he's supposed to be studying and then he's picking up the phone because he's getting busy. The attention span of kids is going like this.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem. And I think we should really take the tech industry to task. And, I've taken it up with his school and they're like, well, we can't do anything about it. It's their phone. So what they do in their free time, la, la, la. And I'm like trying to say, as a school, maybe you should discuss this with parents and come up with a policy so that we can all be consistent.
Yeah.
Because we need to protect kids. It's not that, your responsibility as an educator ends between the breaks and lunch. No, because this kind of behavior, if kids are gaming for an hour on their lunch break and then coming back to school, how does that affect their ability to learn?
Exactly. And I totally agree with you that it needs to be a consistent approach across all the kids and all the parents, because otherwise it's so difficult to say, well, actually, I only want you to look at your phone, in the living room. I don't want you to be looking at it in the bedroom. And then but all my friends are, whereas if there's a consistent approach across all the parents, then I think it's so much more, it just makes it so much easier for all the other parents. No, I totally agree with it.
I'm a kind of parent that says that's too bad because in this house that doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's scary. I think. Yeah, I also see kids not reading as much. Their attention span. If TikTok is the thing that they're always on, it really bothers me to the point that I have already said to my son that I think that if this keeps up, we're going to deinstall TikTok. It's my job as a parent to protect you and to make sure that you have all the opportunities and the tools that you need in life. And if I see that something is really not working for you, then it is my responsibility as a parent to intervene.
Yeah, I totally agree with it. Yeah.
It's hard.
And the other thing I worry about with tech is just the environmental consequences of it.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I wanted to hear more about what you mean by that.
What I worry about is just the energy that's being consumed by computers, basically, by data centers, by all of that. I mean, I hear statistics like if it was a continent, it would be the second continent in terms of, using energy.
Oh, wow.
So and I work in the finance industry. And so I hear people say, they say, oh, well, we have to be much more green. We're not going to be financing, petrol companies. We're not going to be financing oil companies. We're not going to be financing, all these terrible people. And then the very next sentence is, oh, yes, and that we must be doing more, becoming more technologically savvy. And I'm going, hang on. Those two things to me, I mean, I don't know enough about it, but those two things to me seem like they are completely contradictory. If you want to be more green, then you need to be using less energy, which means, using less technology or being smarter about it. So, I'd like to hear your views on that.
That's a good question. I know we have looked into this topic for a few lessons. And I know companies like HP are really looking at something around green programming. So it's programming using less energy and stuff. But to be honest, We tend to teach energy in terms of the whole thing and looking at how different industries. And I have to admit, you're giving me a good idea that we should be doing more to look at the consequence of the technology industry on energy consumption and sustainability, for sure.
Fantastic.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess the answer is, I don't know enough about it. I'm going to have to explore this.
Fantastic. I'd love you to explore it and let me know when you find out more. There's two questions I'd like to ask to finish, Deborah. And the first one is, how has your travels in this life, in your professional career, how has that been affected by the fact that you're a woman?
Ooh.
Has it made a difference? Has it made no difference? Has it been positive? Has it been negative? Have there been incidents that you can think of where it's been an issue?
I think there's been some good and there's been some bad. There's been positives and negatives. Let's start with the positives. I think people trust me as NewTechKids founder and as PreparationTech's founder in terms of, my experience, but also having a son and understanding the education system. So I think in that way, being a woman has been nice. I've been able to have conversations that maybe would be more difficult if it had been men, especially with parents. Funny statistic that I would say 95% of the parent who signs their child up for our courses are female. They're the mother, right? So that's something that's really amazing, that they know enough, they feel strongly enough to get their kids in. And it's nice to be able to talk with them and to have these conversations with them. On the other side of things, I think it's been a bit more difficult for me to attract funding support. For example, I noticed that some males have really if I'm in a conversation, they talk over me, or they question in a very passive aggressive way my qualifications. I had some big business startup guru. I had a call with him, and this was really interesting. We're talking about PreparationTech, and PreparationTech is really about celebrating the diversity and inclusion of people who work in tech or who work on tech-related projects. So, that's kind of what PreparationTech is. There's a lot of color. There's a lot of women when you come on the thing. And our first conversation, he talked about reverse discrimination. He mentioned it 3 times. So we're talking about diversity and inclusion and trying to correct the imbalance. And he's talking about how white people are being discriminated against. So it's these kinds of things that I see. And I guess as time goes on, I'm getting better at just saying, cut it, move on. Just leave these people behind. I'm all about allies, right? I'm a Black female. I'm looking for allies, people who understand my experience, who want to help me, who can bring something, who I can bring something to them. And for the rest, let it go. And unfortunately, the people who control business and funding tend to be white men. And I'm happy that I'm seeing more venture capital firms, more funders who are targeting women and minorities. That has to happen, because I just don't think that a lot of these men have the empathy or the skills or the experience or the will to actually change the way they are. So good and bad. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the last question is, if you had a message for the people who are listening, what would that message be?
Oh my goodness. Seize the day, seize the life, the opportunities in life. Be a bit fearless. Jumping out and starting my 2 organizations was scary, but I am so happy I did that. And again, technology, I don't want to be the person that's saying, computer science. No, it's not that. But please, any parent, any educator out there, have a plan, because if you do not give kids these skills, they will be left behind. Look at China, how it's just forging ahead. Look at the people who are thriving now. We're in COVID. The economy is melting down. The only people I know who aren't really worried are those that are working in technology, because there's such a demand for this stuff. And you don't have to work for Google or Facebook or Amazon. There are so many other companies that are not tech companies, right? There are farming companies, agriculture companies. There are water management companies. There are real retail companies. There are architecture firms. They all are using tech. So don't think of tech just as the programmer or the traditional big tech companies. Think of it as a problem-solving tool that can be applied anywhere you choose to, especially your interests and your passions.
Mm-hmm. And Deborah, if people want to find you, how do they find you?
Best is to find me on LinkedIn, Deborah Carter, under NewTechKids and PreparationTech. NewTechKids.com is the site for our programs, and PreparationTech.com for all of the video interviews of people doing cool things in tech in all different industries.
Fantastic. Well, I'd just like to say, I think you're doing a fantastic job. I think you've really seen that there's a particular need that needs to be filled for these kids. I think it would be wonderful if there were programs like yours, in Paris, around the world. So congratulations for doing that. I think it's courageous what you've done. I think it sounds like it's fantastic. It sounds like kids get a huge amount out of it. So, well done for that. And I hope it all keeps going well.
Great. Thank you so much.
And thank you for the interview. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of Brave New Women. So many of the women I interview say things like, I'm not very good at interviews, or do you think people will be interested? And these are some of the most amazing women I think you'll ever hear from. There are certain podcast sites where you can leave a rating and a review. So Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser. And it would be a fantastic way of boosting these women's confidence. Leave a review. Thank you for listening.